Chapter 2, Secondary School, Introduction. There are years in a boy's life when nothing feels simple anymore. The games in the street become trials on a sports field. The warmth of a family home is replaced by hostile corridors and metal beds. The voice inside you, once carefree and loud, starts whispering questions you don't know how to answer. This chapter of my life begins in that in-between place. I was no longer the barefoot boy racing up and down the green strip behind our house, dreaming of ice cream and Sunday lunches and high-jump records. But I was not yet the man who would stand on military parade grounds, take responsibility, and stare down fear with steady eyes. I was somewhere in the middle, old enough to feel pain deeply, too young to understand what to do with it. Secondary school did not arrive in my life as one clear story. It came as a series of disconnects. A school I didn't choose, a uniform that felt like defeat, a year where I fell out of myself, a hostel that became a kind of family, a bully that taught me to think sharper, a kiss that reminded me I was worthy of tenderness, a rugby field that gave me back my breath, a repossession that cracked the last pieces of my boyhood, and a late-night phone call that opened the door to the military. If Chapter 1 was about the innocence of childhood and the early stories we tell ourselves, then Chapter 2 is about what happens when those stories are tested. This is the chapter where my soul began to develop its survival strategy, where my mindset was shaped by disappointment and small victories, where my thoughts and feelings stopped being simple reactions and started becoming beliefs. You will not find neat triumphs in these pages. You will find a boy learning to live with, dreams redirected, promises broken, loneliness carried in silence, and a stubborn inner voice that refused to die. These are the footprints of a teenage soul, muddy, confused, sometimes angry, sometimes tender, finding its way through schools, hostels, fields, and long dark passages toward a road that would one day lead straight into the military gates.
The Road. I didn't choose a story about dreams, disappointment, and the quiet battles we fight inside. It was December 1970, and I was 13 years old. That beautiful age where the world still lies ahead, like an open veld, waiting to be claimed. The holidays had settled over our street, soft and bright, and you could feel it in everything. In the late sunsets, in the smell of cut grass, even in the way the neighbors lingered outside a little longer after supper. Next door lived Uncle Nick, my father's supervisor at work, and his wife, Aunt Letty. They had 3 children. Anna, who was 2 years older than me, clever, serious, and already the pride of every teacher who crossed her path. And the twins, Cobus and Rhea, my loyal little companions, always ready for games, adventures, and the kind of mischief only shared childhood can invent. We grew up almost like an extension of one another's homes. We played together, dreamed together, built secret plans together, and pushed boundaries together. Their yard was my yard, and mine was theirs. A boy on a bicycle with a head full of dreams one. Warm holiday morning, my bicycle took me straight toward the future I believed was mine, Sasselberg High School. I pedaled past the empty school buildings and the rugby fields stretching out like promises. I could already hear the imagined crowds. I could see myself running onto that field in blue, my favorite color. The number on my back still unknown, but the dream alive. On my way home, I noticed how close the school was to our house. Only a quarter of the distance I had cycled each day during my final year at A.J. Jacobs. Everything felt right. Everything felt meant to be. Most of my friends were going to Sasselberg High, too. Even in my daydreams, I wondered how we would eventually become teammates with the boys from Nord School, our old rivals. But that was a problem for another day. For now, the future felt bright, close, and mine. The silence before the storm. As the long holiday days drifted by, I began to sense something shifting in our home. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a silence, the kind that hangs in the air just before a thunderstorm. My parents spoke softer. Doors closed more gently. Even my sister moved through the house differently, quieter, as if she carried a truth I wasn't meant to know yet. The closer we came to the new school year, the heavier the silence became. I held on to my dream of Sasselberg High like a boy clutching a prized rugby ball, tightly, hopefully, unwilling to imagine any other outcome. One evening, we sat around the dinner table, my father reading the newspaper, my mother dishing up supper, my sister staring at her plate. The quiet pressed against me. I decided to break it. "Ma," I said lightly, "when are we going to buy my new school colors? I can't wait to see how I look in the blue uniform." The moment I said the word blue, my father lowered his newspaper. Slowly, deliberately. He cleared his throat, that heavy, unmistakable sound that tightens a child's stomach. "Chris," he said, steady but distant, "there's something we need to talk about." The room felt smaller. "You're not going to Sasselberg High," he said. "You're going to Vanderbilt High. We've already decided." His words hit harder than any hiding he had ever given me. "But Pa..." "Why?" I asked, confused, helpless. "All my friends are going to Sasselberg High, and I don't want to wear green, and no one there knows how I play rugby." He took a slow breath. "This isn't about rugby," he said. "Sasselberg High isn't just a school. It's a place where everything depends on who your father is, how much money he earns. That school can be cruel." Then he turned slightly toward my sister. "And your sister. She suffered there in Vanderbilt Park. She is happy." She kept her eyes on her plate. He continued. "We had to move her to Vanderbilt Park because of Anna." At the mention of her name, something twisted inside me. Anna, my cousin in the family, but my friend in real life. Brilliant Anna, different Anna, the best student in the class by far. The one who read thick books, asked hard questions, and made teachers smile because she always had the answer. She and my sister were oil and water. Two completely different worlds squeezed into the same classroom. Where my sister needed acceptance, Anna lived in her own universe, clever, confident, untouched by the opinions of others. Their conflict had been simmering for years, and I had been too young, too wrapped up in rugby and bicycles to notice its weight. "She made your sister's life miserable," my father said. We had no choice. I looked at my sister in shock. She had never told me. Her battles had been hidden behind her quietness. "But Pa," I tried again, "Anna is my friend. She's just clever. She's different." I don't think she meant... "It's not up for discussion," he cut in. Final. Closed. Cold. Then my sister lifted her eyes and met mine, sadness deep in them. "Chris, leave it," she whispered. "You won't win this one." And in that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't about school colors. It wasn't about my dreams. It wasn't even about the future. It was about an argument between my father and Anna's father, Uncle Dirk. A tension I did not understand. A wound carried from one generation to the next. And I was being moved like a pawn in a battle I never chose. My world, bright and full of blue dreams just the day before, quietly shifted direction. The day after, searching for freedom. The next morning, before the sun had fully climbed over the rooftops, I took the path to the little dam, my thinking place. I threw stones into the water and watched the ripples run away from me, as if they were carrying my disappointment with them. That was when I saw the two large pipes leading water into the dam. They stood there like open tunnels into another world, a world untouched by parents, arguments, decisions, or rules. Curiosity and rebellion are cousins. I crawled into the first pipe, moving deeper and deeper until the sound of cars rumbled above me. I realized I was beneath the main road. It felt dangerous, wild, secret, a place no one could control but me. When I crawled out again, covered in mud, something inside me felt lighter, free. That evening, I told my father about my discovery. His reaction was immediate and sharp. "No, you do not play in those pipes. It's dangerous. If it rains, you'll drown." But danger didn't scare me as much as a life where I had no say. The forbidden adventure. The next day, I took Cobus and Rhea to the dam. We packed cool drinks and biscuits, gifts from Aunt Letty, and I showed them my underground kingdom. Rhea waited at the entrance as our lookout. "If we get into trouble, we'll shout," we told her. "Then you run for help." We crawled deeper and deeper into the pipes, laughing, whispering, discovering a world beneath the one where we felt powerless. But when we crawled out later that afternoon, brushing mud from our elbows, I saw him, my father, standing there, waiting. His voice was ice. "I told you to stay away from those tunnels. Chris, I'll see you at home." The hiding that changed. Something inside me. At home, he sent me to wait in the room. That day, I received the worst hiding of my childhood. I usually counted the blows. It helped me know when the end was near. But that day, I stopped counting. That day, I did not cry. Something inside me hardened. Not anger, not hatred, but a silent resolve. A seed of rebellion. A decision. Between a school I didn't choose, a future redirected without my voice, rules that felt suffocating, and choices made on my behalf. Something inside me whispered, "This will not be my life forever. One day, I will choose my own road." And in the darkness of those tunnels beneath the earth, with mud on my hands and stubborn fire in my chest, that promise became the first step on the road I didn't choose, but would one day rise above.
Reflection. The road I didn't choose. When I look back at this moment in my life, I realize it was one of the first times I felt what it means to walk a road that wasn't mine to choose. At 13, I didn't have the words for it. I only had feelings, disappointment, confusion, frustration, and a quiet kind of rebellion that started taking shape inside me. What hurt the most wasn't the green school colors. It wasn't leaving behind the rugby field I had already claimed in my imagination. It wasn't even the hiding I got afterwards. What hurt was the feeling of not having a voice. For the first time in my young life, I understood that adults can make decisions that change your whole world, and you have no say. It was a heavy realization for a boy who believed everything was possible. That's why the tunnels called me. It wasn't about danger. It wasn't about mischief. It was about freedom. Crawling under the road, feeling the rumble of cars above me, discovering a world hidden beneath the surface. That was the first moment I felt in control again. Down there, no one decided for me. No one told me where I could or couldn't go. For a few minutes, I was just a boy with a torch of stubbornness in his chest and mud on his hands, free from the rules, expectations, and choices of others. But something changed inside me the day my father caught us at the tunnels. I stopped counting the blows. I stopped crying, not because I was brave, but because something hardened in me, a decision, a quiet one, almost invisible to the people around me, but loud inside my heart. I realized that although I couldn't control everything around me, there was one thing I could control: what I believed about myself and the choices I would make in my own future. This moment became one of the first footprints in my mindset development. It taught me that external control creates internal friction. It taught me that when you take away a child's voice, he will find another place to express it, sometimes in tunnels beneath the earth. Most importantly, it taught me that I never wanted to live a life where others decided my path for me. Later in life, I would learn to choose my road with courage, responsibility, and intention. But the seed of that lesson was planted right here, in disappointment, in silence, in a green uniform I didn't want, and in a hiding I refused to let break me. This was the road I didn't choose, but it was also the road that taught me the importance of choosing. The green uniform of Vanderbilt Park High did not just change the color of my clothes, it changed the color of my inner world. What began as one decision made at a dinner table soon became a year in which I slowly watched myself disappear. The tunnels under the road had given me a taste of freedom, but the months that followed would show me just how far a boy can drift from himself when he walks a road he never chose.
The year I fell out of myself. A story about loneliness, rebellion, and the quiet cost of walking a road you never chose. The first day I stepped into Vanderbilt Park High, I knew I didn't belong there. Some places you enter with excitement, curiosity, even nervousness. I walked into that school with resignation. My feet moved forward, but nothing inside me did. I remember looking down at the green uniform, that terrible color that already felt like defeat, and thinking, this is not my life. This is not my story. This is not my road. But life does not wait for a 13-year-old boy's heart to catch up. The bell rang, the children rushed, the teachers shouted instructions, and I moved with the crowd like driftwood in a fast river. Around me swirled groups of friends who already knew one another. Boys laughing about holiday adventures, girls comparing new stationery, children calling each other by nicknames earned on rugby fields or in primary school classrooms I had never seen. I was alone. Not alone like, I don't know anyone yet. Alone like, I don't fit here, and I don't want to. That was the beginning of the slow fading of parts of myself I had loved. The athlete, the rugby boy, the boy who raced down the green strip at full speed, the boy who dreamed with his whole chest. Vanderbilt Park High did not break me in one blow. It drained me drip by drip. The season I stopped running. In primary school, running wasn't just something I did. It was part of who I was. I was the boy who could sprint barefoot across the green strip behind our house until my lungs burned with joy. I was the boy who could jump over almost anything placed in front of him. And more than anything, I was the boy who once jumped for a friend who passed away. That moment changed me forever. Because that jump wasn't for points or medals. It wasn't for selection. It wasn't to impress a coach. It was for Gielier, my friend who never got the chance to jump again. Cancer had stolen that from him, and far too soon, it stole his life as well. I remember standing on the field that day, the sun warm on my back, the bar waiting. I whispered to myself, "Kik, my maat. Ik spring vandaag weer jou. G kan mij van die hemel zien." That high jump wasn't about winning. It was about love, loyalty, grief, promise. That day they called me Hangies because my hands were always helping, always lifting, always supporting someone else. It was the nickname I carried with pride, a symbol of the boy who stood for others. But at Vanderbilt Park High, that part of me faded. The track was the same. The high jump mat looked the same. The bar stood waiting, as if it remembered a version of me that no longer existed. But I was not the same boy anymore. When athletic season started, the fire in my legs was gone. When high jump came around, I didn't even put my name down. And I think the saddest moment of that whole year was realizing how quietly I walked away from high jump. walked away from the sport I shared with a friend who believed in me. I made a promise to Geely that high jump was our thing, that we would keep going, that I would do it for him. But that year, I broke that promise. Not because I chose to, but because something inside me had collapsed. Nothing inside me wanted to run. Nothing wanted to jump. Nothing wanted to try. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't just stepping away from athletics. I was stepping away from the best parts of myself. The game I lost, before it started rugby, had always been my pride, my anchor, my identity. I believed rugby would be the place where I found my voice again, that no matter what school I went to, the field would still feel like home. But passion cannot survive where the heart is absent. We went for trials, and I didn't push. I didn't tackle with fire. I didn't care enough to show them who I was. My body was on the field, but my spirit was still standing at the fence of Sassolberg High, watching a dream that never grew feet. When the teams were posted on the notice board, I saw my name. Under 14 D team, not A, not B, not even CD. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just accepted it. A quiet surrender. That was another piece of me lost. The boy who sat alone. Schools have invisible maps, unspoken territories where friendships form and personalities gather. But at Vanderbilt Park, no map included me. Break times were the worst. I watched groups gathering easily, laughing effortlessly, belonging naturally. And I sat alone, behind the pavilion, under a tree, on the edge of the field where no one noticed me. The loneliness wasn't loud. It was quiet. The kind that eats away at you slowly, like rust on metal. Slipping away. When a boy loses his sense of belonging, he begins looking for escape. For me, that escape was Soapies, the small bioscope close to the school. Faded posters, old popcorn, dim lights, and no questions asked. The first time I skipped a class, it wasn't planned. I simply walked out the gate and didn't look back. Inside the dark cinema, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Silence. A strange kind of freedom. One day became a week. A week became a habit. School faded. Soapies became my refuge. I wasn't causing trouble. I was avoiding pain. The quiet rebellion. People picture rebellion as loud, shouting, breaking rules, challenging authority. Mine was silent. I simply withdrew, turned inward, stopped showing up emotionally, then physically. Sometimes the deepest rebellion is not what a child does, but what he stops doing.
Reflection. The year I fell out of myself. When I look back on that year, I can still feel how quietly I disappeared from myself. There was no dramatic moment, no explosion, no single day where everything changed. It was slow, a fading, a thinning of who I used to be. I walked into Vanderbilt Park High, already hurting, and every month that followed pulled me further away from the boy I once knew. What still lives in me is how easily identity can slip through a child's fingers. The runner stopped running, the athlete stopped competing. The boy who once flew over a high jump bar for a friend watching from heaven simply looked the other way. And somewhere in the middle of that loneliness, I also let go of a promise. Not because I didn't care, but because I no longer knew how to carry everything at once. Losing yourself is a strange thing. You don't notice the moment it happens. You only realize it later when parts of you feel unfamiliar. People often talk about resilience as if it appears in the hardest moments. Mine didn't, not then. That year didn't make me stronger. It made me smaller. It made me quieter. It made me drift to places where no one could see how empty I felt inside. I didn't rise at Vanderbilt Park. I didn't find myself again on those fields. And nothing inside that school helped me rebuild what I had lost. If anything, I sank deeper. It took years before I felt my spirit lift again, years before that small spark inside me finally breathed. My real recovery didn't happen in a classroom or on a rugby field. It didn't happen through friends or achievements or belonging. My rising began the day I left school behind and stepped into the military, a place where discipline shaped me, where structure steadied me, where struggle gave me something to push against, a place where I slowly started finding pieces of the boy I had misplaced. This reflection is not about triumph, it's about truth. It's about admitting that sometimes we don't rise in the moment, sometimes we only survive. But survival is not failure. Survival is the beginning of strength. And this year, the year I fell out of myself, became one of the deepest footprints of my soul, because it taught me how lost a person can feel before they finally find the road back to themselves. A year can break you without anyone noticing. By the time Vanderbilt Park spat me out on the other side, I was no longer the boy who sprinted for his friend in high jump or chased his dreams on rugby fields. I was tired, not in my body, but in my soul. And yet, even in that tiredness, life handed me a thin thread of hope, a mother's apology, a second chance, and a new school far from home where no one knew my story.
The school that gave me back my breath. A story about new beginnings, hostel life, and learning to survive with a half-healed heart. The longest year of my life was finally crawling to an end. Vanderbilt Park had drained me, hollowed me out, and left me walking through passages like a ghost of the boy I once was. I counted the days like someone waiting for a sentence to run out. And then, about a month before final exams, my mother called me one afternoon and said softly, "Christy, I want to speak to you." Those words worried me. My mother never handled the serious talks. That was my father's territory. When she used that tone, it usually meant something wasn't right. We sat together on the stope, the late afternoon sun lying warm across the cement, and I waited. That uneasy waiting a boy does when he knows the next sentence might change something. My mother looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in months: understanding. She didn't start with rules or lectures. She didn't ask me what I had done wrong. Her voice was soft and full of love when she finally spoke. "My child, I can see how you're struggling." She paused. "I can feel your pain." It was the first time that year that someone had acknowledged what I was living through. She reached over and took my hand, and there was a sadness in her voice when she said, "I'm sorry, Christy. I'm sorry we sent you to Vanderbilt Park High. We made the wrong decision." Hearing that broke something open inside me. Not anger, not relief, but a quiet release. It was the first time I felt seen. Her tone grew more serious. "Christy, with your marks as they are now, you won't pass the year." She let that sink in, then continued. "But if you work hard, if you push, and if you pass grade 8, I promise I will speak to your father. We will find you another school." Another school, another chance, another life. Hope didn't explode inside me. It flickered, a small flame. But after a year of darkness, even a flicker feels like a sunrise. I didn't understand half the work we had learned that year, so I memorized more than I understood. I studied like someone running from something, not toward success, but away from failure. I just needed to pass. I just needed to escape. When the results came out early in December, I could not believe my eyes. I had passed. Barely, probably by a point or two. But it didn't matter. I had done what I needed to do. I had earned a second chance. My mother kept her promise. She spoke to my father, but my father was firm. No, he will not go to Sasselberg High. Then, almost unexpectedly, my mother mentioned another option to him. One of her friends had a son at De Wetnell Technical High School in Kroonstad, at that time one of the biggest boys' schools in the Free State. It came with a condition. I would have to go to the hostel, far from home, only able to come home twice a term. My father agreed. The next day, my mother told me the news. "Christy," she said, the name she kept just for me, "you can go to De Wetnell." Something shifted in me. I felt it immediately. It was as if a heavy stone had been lifted off my chest. I smiled for real, not the forced smiles I had worn all year. "Ma," I asked, "will I still take the same school bus?" She shook her head gently. "No, my child. You're going to live in the hostel. The school is in Kroonstad. It is not Karel de Wet Technical High School in Vanderbijlpark." And it felt like my spirit leaped before my body did. I literally jumped into the air. Hostel, a new town, a new school, a clean slate, a place where no one knew the broken pieces I carried. I wasn't rising yet, but I could breathe again. And sometimes breathing is enough. My mother warned me. At the beginning, it won't be easy. Their rules say that no matter when you arrive at De Wetnell, you must be initiated like a grade 8 boy. I didn't care. It sounded like music, a challenge, a fresh start. Anything was better than Vanderbijlpark. She smiled teasingly and said, "And yes, their school colors are also green, but not that ugly Vanderbijlpark green. Their green is like the Springboks green." For the first time in a long time, I felt satisfied. Arriving at the hostel, it was early January when we left for Kroonstad. My father had just bought a new BMW, and as I sat in the back seat, I felt, maybe for the first time in a year, like a normal child again. Maybe even a lucky one. When we arrived at the school gate, my mouth fell open. Fields everywhere, huge buildings, 4 or 5 hostels, rows of rugby posts like soldiers standing at attention. This place felt big, alive, full of noise and possibility. I wasn't entering a school. I was entering a world. Registration was quick, and I was placed in Huis van der Merwe. My room had 3 grade 8 boys. All of us strangers thrown together, waiting for something to happen. That first night after supper, we were summoned to the hostel meeting room. We sat on hard wooden benches while the hostel prefects introduced themselves. Tall boys with confidence written across their shoulders. Then they read the hostel rules. There were so many, my mind couldn't keep up. Luckily, we each received a printed copy. We were told that in a week's time, we would write a test on the rules. A test on rules. Only in a hostel. And strangely, I liked it. The hostel felt like a small village, children from all across the Free State thrown together. We had to learn to work together, or the whole structure collapsed. You learn quickly in a hostel. Don't show off. Don't draw too much attention. Choose your moments carefully. Respect the seniors, protect the juniors, and find your place quietly. The name I didn't choose. During the holidays, we had been instructed to learn the school song. On the first day of school, all the grade 8 boys and new students sat right in front of the hall. The teacher began playing the tune on the piano. We stood, we sang, and I, foolishly, proudly, loudly, sang with my whole chest. Right there, in front of everyone, my voice cracked. Not a little crack, a full frog-like quack. The hall echoed with it. I felt my stomach drop. After assembly, a senior walked straight up to me. "I saw you," he said, "and I heard you. You sounded like a frog." He paused. "Your name is now Pada." He didn't ask, he declared. Then he told everyone around him, "This is Pada, not Chris, not anything else." For a moment, fear gripped me. I felt that old, familiar sinking. Here we go again. Another name I didn't choose. Another identity assigned me. But something inside me responded differently this time. I straightened my shoulders. I looked him in the eye. And I thought, fine. If I'm Pada, I'll make it work for me. And that was the beginning of the next chapter of my life. Not rising, not healing, but surviving with a little more strength than before.
Reflection. The school that gave me back my breath. When I look back on the year I left Vanderbilt Park, what stands out most is not excitement or hope. It is relief, that soft, tired kind of relief that comes after a long season of holding yourself together. Leaving that school did not heal me, but it loosened something that had been tight for too long. It gave me a little space to breathe again. At 13, we don't always know how to explain our pain, but we feel it. I felt it every morning when I put on that green uniform. I felt it sitting alone on the field. I felt it when I stopped running, stopped jumping, stopped being the boy I once knew. And I felt it most on the day my mother looked at me with softness in her eyes and said, "I am sorry." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until it came. Moving to DeWitt Knell didn't fix anything inside me, but it did shift something. It felt like someone had opened a small window in a room that had been closed for too long. The air was still heavy, but at least it could move. The hostel was loud and chaotic and full of boys trying to become young men before their time. And somehow, in the middle of that noise, I found little pockets of comfort, not belonging yet, but not completely lost either. I watched how the boys worked together, how they teased one another, how they learned to survive under one roof. It was a strange kind of family stitched together by rules and routines, but it held me in a way I hadn't expected. My new nickname, Pada, could easily have broken me again. Another name I didn't choose, another label placed on me, but something in my had changed just enough to accept it without collapsing. Maybe I was tired of fighting. Maybe I had learned that sometimes it's easier to bend than to break. Or maybe I was simply grateful that this time the name didn't come with rejection. It came with a strange form of acceptance, a way of being noticed, even if it was for the wrong reason. I didn't become stronger that year. I didn't become confident or sure of myself, but I did learn how to survive in a new place, how to adapt, how to keep going, even when the heart lags behind. Healing didn't start here, not yet, but this was the year the darkness stopped deepening. This was the year I learned to stand still long enough for the world to shift me slowly toward the person I would become later. Sometimes growth doesn't look like strength. Sometimes it looks like endurance, the simple act of holding on until the next chapter arrives. And that is what this year was for me, a holding space between who I had been and who I was still becoming. The rising would only come later, but this was where the long road toward it quietly began. DeWitt Knell did not heal me, but it gave me something Vanderbilt Park never could, a place to practice being someone new. In the hostel, the rules were clear, the hierarchies visible, the rhythms predictable, and in that structure, a different part of me began to wake. The part that watched carefully, that read the room, that learned where danger lived. It was only a matter of time before that quiet observation would be tested by a boy named Michael, and by the question, what do you do when strength is used against you?
Where cleverness became stronger than fists. A story about fear, strategy, and the quiet strength that grows in the shadows of childhood. Some memories arrive without warning, years later, in the most ordinary moments. You can be walking through a shop or lying awake in the early hours when suddenly a scene from long ago drifts back. Not in words, but in feelings. the smell of dust, the sound of a voice, the sting of a slap that once burned across your cheek. And before you can stop it, you are young again, standing in a room where a boy learns who he is becoming. For me, this memory begins on a hot and restless Saturday afternoon in the hostel at DeWitt Nell. Those were the long, lazy days when time seemed to stall in the air, when boys lay on their beds staring at the cracks in the ceiling, praying the prefects would forget we existed until supper. Outside, the sun hung heavy over the rugby fields. Inside, the corridors were muffled and sleepy, the kind of silence that made you overly aware of your own breathing. I was stretched out on my bed by the window, half daydreaming, half avoiding the heat, when I heard his voice in the passage. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. There are voices that command a room and voices that threaten it. Michael's voice was the second kind, sharp, arrogant, always searching for someone smaller to land on. Every hostel has one boy like him. Ours was Michael. He was tall and broad, with the swagger of someone who had never been stopped. He moved through the passages like he owned them, making sure every younger boy knew exactly where the power lay. He never picked fights with boys his own size. Bullies rarely do. He preferred those of us still finding our feet, the ones who looked away when he passed, the ones who weren't ready yet to say no. I kept my eyes on the window, hoping he'd walk past, hoping the room would stay quiet. But the problem with wishing is that it rarely stops what's already coming. He stepped inside. The room shifted. The air tightened in my lungs. He stopped beside my bed, waiting for me to acknowledge him. When I didn't, he grabbed my shirt, pulled me off the mattress, and shoved me into a chair. Everything happened too quickly to resist. His face hovered close to mine, the smirk already forming, the anger already building. Then the slaps came. They landed with sharp, open-handed precision, one after the other, each one harder than the last. My head snapped sideways. My cheek burned. I tasted metal on my tongue, but I didn't say a word. Something in me refused to give him the pleasure of hearing pain leave my mouth. I sat still, silent, taking each blow. Not because I was brave, but because I had learned, somewhere between Vanderbilt Park and this place, that reacting makes them stronger. Silence confuses a bully. Silence unsettles him. Silence belongs to the one who is thinking, not the one who is hitting. Eventually he stopped, breath heavy, convinced he had done enough to remind me of my place. And just as the last sting faded from his hand, the door opened and a prefect stepped into the room. "What's going on here?" he asked, eyes narrowing. Michael didn't hesitate. "He swore at me," he lied smoothly. I taught him respect. The prefect accepted the story without question. Boys like Michael are good at that, bending truth until it fits them perfectly. The prefect nodded, said nothing more, and walked out with Michael at his shoulder. And just like that, I was alone again in the quiet. I sat there for a moment, heart beating loud enough for me to hear it in my ears. Then I stood up, took a towel from my cupboard, and walked to the showers. My face throbbed, my nose was bleeding, and the warm water stung as it ran across the rawness of my skin. But it was there, with the water running over my face, and the small drops turning pink as they fell, that a strange calmness settled inside me. Not anger, not fear. Something colder, clearer. A decision that felt older than my age. No one does this to me, and walks away. And then another thought followed, softer, quieter, almost like a whisper from the part of me I had forgotten. Maybe Vanderbilt Park had a purpose after all. The year I survived there had taught me things I didn't yet understand fully. How to read danger, how to see through people, how to hide in plain sight, how to understand the structure of power long before anyone explained it to me. Things I thought had harmed me were, in that moment, becoming tools. When I walked back to the room, the others were still quiet, waiting to see what my next move would be. But I didn't slam anything, or throw anything, or shout. I simply lay down on my bed and stared up at the ceiling. And in that quiet, I made a promise, not to fight back with fists, but to fight back with something far more dangerous. My mind, 3 weeks of watching. In the days that followed, I said nothing to anyone. Not about the slaps, not about the blood, not about the prefect who had believed him so easily. I carried the silence like a shield. But I watched. I watched Michael's patterns until I knew them better than he did. Who he talked to, when he went for a smoke, which prefects liked him, which ones avoided him, how long he lingered in the dining hall, where he hid when he was nervous, when he was bold, when he let his guard down. 3 weeks of quiet observation, careful and patient, like someone studying the movements of a wild animal. Not out of fear, but out of understanding that timing is everything. He had strength on his side, but I had something else. A lesson burned into me by a school corridor in Vanderbilt Park. Cleverness, when used well, can be stronger than fists. The plan. One night long after lights out, when the hostel settled into the soft buzz of sleeping boys, I slipped out of bed. The air was cool against my skin, carrying the faint smell of polish and old wooden floors. I moved carefully, every step measured, every shadow familiar. I made my way to the kitchen. Every hostel kitchen has a weakness, a window latch that never closes properly, a door that sticks, a cleaner who forgets to lock something. I knew the routine. I knew the timing. I knew how to enter without making a sound. Inside, shelves lined with rusks for the morning tea stood waiting. I took them all. Every bag, every last crumb. And for dramatic flair, I added a tin of cookies too. The next morning, as predictably as sunrise, Michael disappeared to the boiler room for his quiet smoke before breakfast. That was my moment. I slipped into his room, opened his locker, and placed everything inside. Then I closed it, walked away, and blended back into the rhythm of the hostel morning, as if nothing had happened. The search. Breakfast was barely underway when the atmosphere shifted. The dining hall buzzed, boys still half asleep with metal cups in hand, when the room fell silent. Mr. Crowther, the head of the hostel, stood at the front, arms folded, face unreadable. "Last night," he said slowly, "someone broke into the kitchen and stole all the rusks." A murmur rippled through the hall. No one leaves until the dorms have been searched. Prefects poured out of the hall. Minister Drogta followed behind them. The hall sat still, caught between curiosity and dread. I sat quietly, hands around my cup, heart beating hard under my shirt, not with guilt, but with a strange thrill of waiting. This wasn't revenge. This was correction, balance, justice, the kind that arrives silently through cracks in the system. After a long wait, the search party returned. Mr. Crowther stepped forward again. "Michael," he said, voice echoing across the room. "Office, now." Silence. He had been found with the stolen rusks, the cookies, and, to make things worse for him, a bottle of wine and cigarettes. 6 strokes, a final warning. One more mistake and he'd be expelled. When he returned, he was not the same boy. Some boys learn through pain. Michael learned through humiliation. He never touched me again. never touched anyone again. And I never told a soul. The shift inside me. I lay on my bed that night with the window cracked open, listening to the sounds of the hostel, the soft footsteps in the passage, the muffled laughter from a room where someone whispered jokes after lights out, the metallic groan of the geyser in the distance. Everything was the same, yet something inside me had shifted. I had not hit him. I had not shouted. I had not run or cried or accepted my place. I had outthought him, outweighted him, outplayed him. And in doing so, I proved something I did not know I needed to prove. I was not helpless. I was not weak. I was not the boy who had slunk through the corridors of Vanderbilt Park trying to hide from the world. I had something inside me, something dangerous if used well, something powerful if used wisely. That day, in the quiet of my own mind, I learned one of the most important lessons of my young life. Cleverness, when sharpened by hardship, can become stronger than fists. And it was a lesson I carried with me, far beyond the hostel walls, into the military, into adulthood, into every place where strength alone could not solve the problem in front of me.
Reflection, where cleverness became stronger than fists, the quiet wisdom learned in a room where no teacher stood. Some moments in childhood don't feel important when they happen. They don't announce themselves. They don't carry lightning or drama. They slip into your life quietly, a slap, a chair scraping across the floor, a look that lingers too long, and years later you realize that something in you changed in that exact moment. This story was one of those turning points, not because I was hurt, but because I discovered what I had left. For a long time, I believed that Vanderbilt Park had taken something away from me, my confidence, my voice, my belief that the world was fair. I thought I walked out of that school emptier than I had entered. But in the aftermath of Michael's hands on my face, standing alone in a hostel shower with warm water and the metallic taste of blood, I discovered something far more complicated. Vanderbilt Park hadn't broken me. It had sharpened me. It taught me to read people, the tone of a voice, the shift of a shoulder, the difference between anger and insecurity. It taught me to survive in places where rules weren't always written on walls, but in the expressions of the boys who walked past you. It taught me adaptability, observation, stillness. It taught me that strength isn't always visible. And that day, when I chose not to meet violence with violence, when I chose silence over reaction and strategy over fury, I stepped into a different kind of power, one I didn't fully understand at the time. The boy who sat in that chair wasn't weak. He was thinking. Thinking is its own form of bravery, a quiet, steady kind that grows only in places where you have been pushed to the corners of yourself. In the 3 weeks that followed, as I watched and waited and planned, I discovered something that would follow me into adulthood, into leadership, into the military, into every room where conflict lived. Cleverness, when used with purpose, is stronger than fists. It lasts longer. It leaves fewer scars. It teaches you who you truly are. That day didn't make me a bully's conqueror. It made me my own protector. It taught me that I did not have to live at the mercy of other people's anger. I had options. I had control. I had the ability to change the outcome without shouting, without hitting, without becoming the very thing I feared. It also taught me something quieter and deeper, that the parts of us shaped in pain can one day become the parts that protect us. Years later, in the military, in business, in moments of leadership, I recognized the same feeling I had felt that day, the calm that comes when you understand the situation before you act, the steadiness, the patience, the tactical mind that chooses the right moment instead of the loud one. This story is not about revenge. It is not even about the bully. It is about the birth of a different kind of strength, one that does not live in the muscles but in the mind, a strength that whispers instead of shouts, a strength that only grows in the shadows of fear, not the spotlight of applause, a strength that becomes part of your DNA. When I think back now, I don't see the slap or the sting or the blood. I see the moment the boy I was realized at Saint Seat. I am not helpless. I am not cornered. I am not done. I have a mind that can protect me. I have a spirit that won't bow. I have a cleverness born from survival, and it is stronger than any fist that might try to break me. That is the footprint this story left, not a mark of violence, but the first step into a quiet, powerful confidence that would shape the man I later became. Standing up to Michael without lifting a hand did more than protect me from a bully. It showed me that I was not as powerless as I had once believed. My mind, sharpened by hurt, could become a shield. But life is never shaped by toughness alone. Just as fear had its lessons for my soul, softness would have its own. And one ordinary Saturday night in a dark school hall, a girl's small hand on my arm would teach me something Michael never could.
The Night a Kiss Found Me. A story about innocence, awkwardness, and the unexpected tenderness of a moment that stays with you your whole life. There are memories that slip into your life like soft footsteps. Quiet, gentle, unnoticed at first. And then, years later, you discover that they stayed, tucked away somewhere in the folds of your youth, carrying a tenderness no other moment could ever quite replace. My first kiss was like that. Not planned, not chased. It found me the way stars find a still pond, by accident and with a shimmer that lives long after the light is gone. It was the 1970s, a world that now feels ancient compared to the lives teenagers live today. Parents in those years didn't talk to their children about love or attraction, or the things that make your stomach flutter for reasons you don't understand. Words like dating or relationships didn't exist in the vocabulary of our parents. And sex? That word hung in the air like a forbidden cloud. You didn't say it, you didn't ask about it, you didn't even think about saying it out loud. We had no social media videos to teach us anything. No television dramas where teenagers stumbled through their first clumsy romance. The only sources of information were rumors, older boys, and our own imaginations, which were usually very wrong. And for a shy boy like me, tucked away in a boys' school where girls were creatures of myth, the subject felt like something from another universe. Every second Wednesday evening, we had Volksspiel at the girls' commercial school hostel. You dressed neatly, walked across the grounds pretending you didn't care, and then stood stiffly against the wall, pretending you were invisible. The brave ones danced, spinning girls around who giggled behind their hair. The rest of us waited for the torture to end. I was firmly in the second group. I didn't dance. I didn't speak. I tried not to make eye contact. The wall behind me and I became close friends. But hostels have their own culture of education. Not through teachers, not through books, but through the older boys who have seen more of the world than you have. Ours was Piet Vorster. Big, muscular, naturally confident, first-team rugby player. Always a couple of girls hovering around him when we went to athletics meets. He was, in our eyes, a professor of romance. Sunday evenings were our unofficial lectures. We would gather in the dormitory or the passage, eyes wide, pretending to act older than we were, waiting for Piet to return from whichever girlfriend he had visited that weekend. He loved the attention, and we loved the lessons. He would describe everything: the kisses, the touching, the way girls smelled, the way they laughed, the feeling of hands slipping behind your neck. We were too young to understand half of it, too embarrassed to ask questions, too fascinated to look away. It was music in our ears. terrifying, and magical at the same time. I didn't know whether those stories made me wiser or just more afraid of girls than before. Maybe both. Life carried on like that until one Saturday night when the school hall transformed, as it always did on weekends, into the makeshift cinema of De Wet Nell. We would crowd into the hall with our blankets, rows of wooden seats clattering as boys dropped into them. The projector flickered to life, specks of dust dancing across its beam like tiny stars. That particular Saturday, the film was a horror movie about frogs. A strange choice, even for those years. But with my nickname being Pada, the whole thing had an added layer of humor. The seniors whistled and joked that the movie was my story. I just rolled my eyes and pretended not to care. Though secretly I did enjoy the attention, even if it was the teasing kind. The hall was packed, boys crammed shoulder to shoulder. The smell of popcorn, sweaty socks, and hostel blankets mixing in the air. Just as the lights dimmed, 2 girls slipped into the row in front of me. They weren't from our school. You could tell by the neat dresses and brushed hair, so different from our untidy uniformed existence. They were daughters of family friends visiting one of the hostel teachers for the weekend. The movie began. Shadows, dark water, ominous croaking that filled the hall. Within minutes, boys were jumping in their seats, pretending not to be scared while gripping the armrests a bit too tightly. And then it happened. A small hand reached over the back of the chair and touched my arm. I froze, not from fear of the movie, but from the shock of her touch. I looked up and her face was turned toward me. Wide eyes, nervous smile. "Do you want to come sit here?" she whispered. "I'm scared." My heart jumped so loudly, I was sure everyone around us could hear it. I nodded quickly, too quickly, and climbed over the seat, stumbling clumsily into the empty space beside her. She slipped her arm through mine, holding onto me as if the monsters on the screen might leap out and swallow her whole. Her perfume, soft, sweet, something like flowers, drifted toward me, and for the rest of the movie, I hardly noticed what happened in the film. All I felt was her hand wrapped around my arm, her shoulder brushing mine every time she flinched, her breath catching in her throat during the frightening moments. When the movie ended and the lights brightened, she turned to her friend and said she wanted to walk with me. Just to say thank you. My stomach dropped. Not in fear, in awe. We walked together, the 2 of us and her quiet friend trailing behind, across the dark school grounds toward the hostel. The air was cool now, a contrast to the thick heat of the day, and the night carried a stillness that made everything feel unreal, as if the world was holding its breath. We passed the workshops, their windows dark and hollow, and stepped into a narrow passage between the buildings. The shadows wrapped around us. And then she stopped. Before I could ask why, she turned, slipped her arms around my neck, and pressed her lips against mine. Soft, warm, unexpected, completely overwhelming. My legs turned to water. She kissed me again, this time slower. And the whole world pulled away until all that was left was the warmth of her mouth and the shock that someone actually wanted to kiss me. She pulled back, breathless, looked at me for a moment, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she ran off into the night, her friend chasing after her, their laughter disappearing around the corner. I stood there frozen, every nerve in my body awake for the first time. I floated, back to the hostel, showered without feeling the water, climbed into bed, closed my eyes, and the moment replayed again, and again, and again. The smell of her perfume, the softness of her mouth, the electricity of surprise, the warmth of her arms around me. I had heard dozens of stories from Piet about kisses. None of them sounded like this. None of them prepared me for the way a kiss can live in your chest long after it leaves your lips. It was my first open-mouth kiss, my first moment of being chosen, my first glimpse of what tenderness feels like when it's new and unearned, my first collision with a world I had been too shy to approach. And something inside me knew, even then, that nothing after this would ever feel quite the same as the first time. Even so, I didn't suddenly become confident or brave around girls. The shyness stayed. The awkwardness stayed. I never had a real girlfriend in school. But that moment, that soft, surprising, stolen moment, stayed too. A memory that would sit quietly in my life for years, reminding me that sometimes the best things in childhood don't come from courage. Sometimes they find you when you're sitting quietly in the dark, too shy to move, too young to understand, and exactly the boy you were meant to be when a girl decides, for one perfect moment, to kiss you.
Reflection. The night a kiss found me. On innocence, awakening, and the tender moments that shape a young boy's understanding of love. There are certain moments in a boy's life that arrive long before he understands their meaning. They don't change the world around him. They change the world inside him. They slip in quietly like a breeze through a half-open window, stirring something that has been waiting patiently for its turn to wake. My first kiss was one of those moments. When I think back now, it wasn't the kiss itself that mattered most, not the sensation or the surprise or the sweetness of it. What mattered was what it awakened. It was the first time in my young life that I felt chosen, not because of sport, not because of friendship, not because of my reputation, but simply because a girl reached across the dark and held onto my arm, trusting me with her fear and giving me her affection without expectation. That does something to a young boy's heart. Growing up in the 1970s, love was never explained to us. Attraction wasn't something parents talked about. We learned everything from rumors, from older boys bragging in the hostel passages, from stolen pieces of information that were more mystery than truth. Our understanding of romance was stitched together with the threads of imagination and fear. So when that girl kissed me, without warning, without instruction, without any of the bravado the older boys described on Sunday nights, it cut straight through all the confusion. It was simple, pure, human. It didn't make me confident overnight. It didn't suddenly erase my shyness. It didn't catapult me into romance or relationships, but it did something subtle, something important. It told me that I was worthy of affection, even if I didn't yet believe it myself. You don't realize how deeply that matters until much later in life. The first time someone looks at you with softness, when you don't expect it, it plants a seed, one that grows quietly in the background of your becoming. A seed that says, you are not invisible, you are not unlovable, you are seen. And maybe that's why first kisses stay with us, not because they are perfect, not because they define us, but because they show us a part of ourselves we couldn't see before. In that dark passage behind the workshops, with my heart racing and my legs almost giving way, I felt a warmth I didn't know how to name. It wasn't desire, it wasn't lust, it wasn't romance, it was something simpler. A moment of connection that arrived before I was ready for it, but exactly when I needed it. As I grew older, I realized something else too, that some of our most important emotional milestones don't come from the lessons adults try to teach us. They come from the unexpected, from the unplanned, from the small acts of tenderness that happen by accident. That girl probably forgot the moment long ago. For her, it may have been nothing more than a thank you kiss after a scary movie, but for me it became a quiet turning point, a moment where innocence stepped softly into awakening. And even though I never had a real girlfriend in school, and even though shyness stayed with me for years, that single moment left a footprint on my soul. It taught me that love doesn't always arrive with knowledge. Sometimes it arrives with fear. Sometimes it arrives with trembling hands. Sometimes it arrives in the dark when you least expect it, and it gives you just enough courage to take one small step toward who you will one day become. That first kiss didn't turn me into a confident young man. I remained shy, careful, and unsure around girls, but something had shifted, a quiet belief that I was not invisible, not entirely unworthy of affection. While that seed lay resting in one corner of my heart, another old love began stirring in another corner, a love that smelled of grass and deep heat and sounded like boots pounding a rugby field. It was time to find out whether the game that had once defined me still had a place in my life.
The day I proved I still had something inside me. A story about a second chance, a rugby field, and the boy who came back to life. Some years in your life pass like a blur. Others sit in your memory like a stone in a river. The water keeps flowing, but it always has to move around that one solid thing. My first year at DeWitt Knell was like that. Not a stone of pain like Vanderbilt Park had been, but a solid, heavy year where things slowly, quietly shifted inside me. By then, I had already survived the worst year of my young life. I had watched myself fade in a green uniform that never felt like mine. I had walked corridors where I didn't belong, skipped classes to hide in a dark bioscope, and broken a promise to a friend who watched me from heaven. I had fallen out of myself. DeWitt Knell did not meet me with fireworks or salvation. It met me with early mornings, hostel bells, loud passages, and boys from all over the Free State trying to grow up inside the same four walls. Somehow, it suited me. There's a strange comfort in a place where everyone is struggling together. No one is special. No one is spared. You just learn the rules and survive. I adapted quickly. Too quickly, maybe. I learned to read people, which seniors to avoid, which ones had a sense of humor, which ones used power to bully, and which ones used it to protect. I learned to read situations, when to keep quiet, when to laugh, when to disappear. In a hostel, you develop a sixth sense for danger. Most weekends and school holidays, I traveled home by train. I'd get off at Colebrook Station, that small, dusty platform that became my little harbor. My parents would be waiting there, my mother waving, my father standing back a step or two, quiet as always, but present. Those visits stitched something back into me. At home, my shoulders relaxed, my voice returned. I sat at the table and told stories about hostel life. The noise, the food, the prefects, the pranks, the ridiculous rules. I spoke like someone who existed again. And Cobus and Rhea, my childhood companions, drank in every word. They sat with wide eyes while I colored the stories in. Just a little more daring here, a little more dangerous there. As if I could add courage to my own life by painting it with bigger strokes. But beneath the stories, there was one thing I wasn't talking about. I still hadn't gone back to rugby. I jogged in the late afternoons, ran laps around the fields, kept myself in shape. I spent hours in the gym, pushing weights, feeling my body grow stronger. But the rugby field remained a place I watched from the side. My feet refused to cross that line. The memory of Vanderbilt Park still stung too deeply. The D team, the loss of love for the game, the boy who had simply stopped caring. So I watched. DeWitt Knell's first team was something to see. They were big, disciplined, sharp. That year, they had 8 Craven Week players, 8 boys wearing the dreams of every other player on their backs. They played intelligent rugby, the kind that made you proud to be at the same school, even if you were only a spectator leaning against a fence. Sometimes, standing there on the touchline, I felt that old pull, that itch in the muscles, that instinct that wants to join, to run, to hit, to belong. But then my mind reminded me of the pain that had come the last time I had trusted that feeling. So I stayed where it felt safer, just on the edge. The decision. It was at the start of grade 10 that something inside me finally moved. I can't tell you the exact day. There was no lightning bolt, no dramatic moment, just a small, nagging thought that refused to leave me alone. You're not finished with this game yet. One afternoon, after a maths class that felt longer than the whole week, I stayed behind when the other boys streamed out. The classroom emptied. Chairs scraped. Bags zipped. Laughter faded down the passage. And there I stood, hovering near my desk, trying to convince my legs to walk to the front. At the board stood Mr. Redpath, our mathematics teacher. He was the kind of man boys fear instinctively, loud when he was angry, sharp when you were lazy, quick to point out when you didn't do your work. His bright red curls made his temper look even wilder. But he was also the under-16 rugby coach. Eventually, I took a breath and walked to his desk. "Sir," I began, and my voice sounded much younger than I wanted it to. He looked up, probably expecting another excuse about homework. "Yes, Chris," he said. "Sir, I used to play rugby, proper rugby, at primary school, but then things happened, and I stopped." It was a clumsy explanation for something far more complicated. I didn't know how to tell him about disappearing into myself, about Vanderbilt Park, about Soapies, about the boy who wasn't sure he deserved a team anymore. I only had those few words. He closed his book slowly. "Tell me," he said. So I did. Not every detail, but enough. He listened, really listened. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like an adult was looking past what I had done and into who I was. After a while, he nodded. "Chris, it's not going to be easy. This is a big school. The boys have played together for years. The teams are settled. There's a pecking order." He paused, and my heart dropped a little. Then he added, "But I'll give you a chance. Come to practice tomorrow." Just like that. No big speeches, no promises, just a chance. That night, I didn't sleep much. Rugby scenes ran through my head like a movie. Tackles, scrums, lineouts, mud, sweat, the sound of boots on grass. The boy who had stopped believing in himself lay awake, making room for a different thought. Maybe you still have something inside you. Back on the field. During the school holidays, my parents had bought me new boots and rugby clothes. It was a quiet agreement between us, especially between my father and me. He never went overboard with words or emotions, but when he handed me that pair of boots, his eyes said enough. "I still see you as a player." The next day, after school, I walked down to the fields with my kit bag hanging heavy at my side. The under-16 group gathered on the field closest to the first team. I could hear the shouting from the A field, feel the energy of the top players pounding into the ground next door. Some of the boys looked at me with suspicion. That sideways look hostile boys give someone who suddenly appears where he hasn't been before. Before the murmurs could grow, Mr. Redpath raised his voice just enough. "Listen up," he said. "Chris had an injury. He's recovered now. He's joining us." An injury. That was the story he gave them. Years later during the border war, I ran into him in the bush. We stood there, both older men by then, with more lines on our faces and more stories in our eyes. I thanked him that day, not just for the coaching, not for my place on the team. I thanked him for that injury, for giving me a story that protected my dignity until I could find it myself. Training started. We ran. We did fitness. We hit tackle bags. The months I had spent running and working in the gym paid off. My lungs burned, but they didn't fail me. I wasn't at the back of the group. I was in front. When he asked my position, I didn't hesitate. Hooker, sir, number 2. The first time we packed into a scrum, something extraordinary happened. My body remembered. My muscles slotted into place. My shoulders felt at home between the props. My neck bent in that familiar curve. When the 2 packs came together, there was a deep, old feeling in my chest. I've been here before. I belong here. For a boy who had wondered if he still had anything left, that moment was pure oxygen. At first, I was placed in the B team. That didn't bother me. I was on the field again. I was wearing a jersey. I was running with a group of boys working toward something together. Halfway through that first match, I realized I wasn't thinking about Vanderbilt Park. I wasn't thinking about the tunnels. I wasn't thinking about Soapies. I was just playing. That alone was a kind of miracle. After 2 games, my name appeared next to the words A-SPAN, reserve. I stared at the list for a long time. Not because I doubted it, because part of me had never expected to see it again. One chance. We played against Kronstadt High on a bright afternoon. I can still remember the hard ground, the nervous buzz, the smell of deep heat and cut grass. I pulled on the substitute jersey, stretched on the sideline, told myself to be ready, even though a part of me thought I might sit out the whole match. I didn't. 5 minutes in, our hooker twisted his ankle badly in a ruck. He tried to stand, but his leg buckled. "Sub," Mr. Redpath shouted. "Chris, you're on." I ran onto the field, and in that moment, everything became very simple. This wasn't about the crowd. It wasn't about my parents. It wasn't even about the scoreboard. It was about one thing. Prove to yourself that you still have something inside you. The game became a blur of contact and color. I threw myself into every scrum, bound as tightly as I could, pushed as hard as my legs allowed. I tackled low and hard. I listened, called, followed the game plan. With every ruck, every collision, every run, a piece of the doubt that had lived inside me began to loosen. With about 5 minutes left, we were behind by 2 points. The ball went into touch near their try line. We had a line out. I jogged to the mark with the ball in my hands. My heart pounded in my chest, not with fear this time, but with focus. I looked at the front jumper and said, "Short ball, I'll throw, you tap back." It was a move we had practiced countless times in training. The referee blew his whistle. I took my steps. The ball left my hands in a smooth, short arc. He leapt, tipped it back. The ball dropped perfectly into my hands, and I drove. I felt a defender clamber onto my back, but my legs kept pumping. I leaned forward, pushed through the contact, and suddenly the ground beneath my chest was over the line. Try. For a second, there was silence in my head. The kind of silence that only comes when something important has just happened. Then the noise hit me. Shouts, backslaps, hands on my head. My teammates pulling me up. We had won the game, but more importantly, I had crossed another line that day. One you can't paint with white chalk. I had stepped over the line that said, "You're finished. You're broken. You have nothing left." And I had answered it with my body, my blood, my breath. No, I'm still here. My place in the A team was never questioned again after that. The phone call. That evening, after supper, I walked down the hostel passage to the little phone booth. It was just a small glass cubicle with a metal phone, scratched walls, and the faint smell of sweat and dust. But to us, it was a doorway home. I dialed our number with shaking fingers. My mother answered. "Ma, it's me." I told her about the game, about being called up, about the try, about the win. I could hear the pride in her breath before she even found her words. Then my father came on. "How did it go?" he asked in that understated way of his. "Pa, I made the A team. I scored the winning try." There was a pause. I could almost see him standing there with the phone in his hand. "Well done, my boy," he said at last. Simple words. But to the boy in that booth, they might as well have been a medal. When I put the phone down and stepped back into the hostel corridor, something was different. The walls hadn't moved. The boys hadn't changed. The rules were the same. But I wasn't walking the way I had walked a year before. My shoulders were a little higher. My eyes were a little clearer. My steps were a little steadier. That day on the rugby field, I had proved something important. Not to my parents, not to my coach, not to my teammates, to myself. I still had something inside me.
Reflection. The day I proved I still had something inside me. When I look back on that match now, I know it wasn't just another schoolboy game. It was a turning point, not on the scoreboard, but in my soul. For a long time, I had lived with a quiet belief that something in me had broken for good. Vanderbijl Park had taken more than a year of my life. It had taken my confidence, my voice, my love for the game, and my sense of belonging. I had watched myself slip away and had no idea how to get that boy back. That afternoon in Kroonstad, I discovered something I'd forgotten. You don't lose who you are as easily as you think. You can bury it. You can run from it. You can hide in dark bioscopes and behind low marks and under green jerseys that don't fit. But the real you waits, quietly, patiently, sometimes for years. Speaking to Mr. Redpath was the first sign that I was ready to look for that boy again. Putting on my boots was the second. Running onto the field as a reserve was the third. But scoring that try, that was the moment I felt him come back. Not in full, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to know that I still had courage. Enough to know that my body still remembered how to give everything. Enough to know that my heart could still care about something deeply without collapsing. I didn't become a new person that day. I became more myself. The military would later shape me, discipline me, and sharpen me. It would take the raw material of who I was and forge it into something stronger. But none of that would have been possible if I hadn't first proved to myself that there was still something in me worth working with. That is what the story is about. Not rugby, not a last-minute try, not a schoolboy Timmy's hero moment. It is about the day I discovered that the soul doesn't give up on you, even when you've given up on yourself. It waits for the right moment, the right field, the right decision, and then, if you're willing, it steps forward again. This was the day I proved to myself that I still had something inside me. And from that day on, I walked differently. Because once you know you still have something inside you, you can face whatever comes next. Scoring that try did more than win a match. It won back a part of myself I thought I had lost forever. I walked differently after that day, not as a boy who believed he was broken, but as someone who had proof that there was still fire in his chest. And yet, life was not done testing that fire. While I was rebuilding myself in Kroonstad, life at home was quietly unraveling. The next chapter of my school years would not be written on a rugby field, but on the bare floors of an empty living room, and in a small phone booth where a boy chose a future he could not yet see.
The night a boy became a soldier. A story about shame, silence, and the night a young man chose the road that would break him and rebuild him. It was the beginning of a new school year, grade 11. The year every teacher said was the most important of your entire school career. I heard their words, the warnings buried inside them, but they slid off me like water. Something inside me was already restless, unsettled, fighting its own battles long before the first bell rang. I wanted to believe this would be my year. But even in those early weeks, something chewed quietly at me. Schoolwork had never come easily. The subjects you could memorize, history, geography, biology, I could handle. But the subjects that required true understanding, the kind where your brain had to twist and turn in ways mine refused to do, mathematics and science, those were a different world. Each lesson left me a step further behind. Each test showed me in cold ink how far I had fallen. Study sessions became torture. I would sit at my desk, the books open, the words swimming, the numbers impossible. The silence around me felt heavy, a weight I could not lift, and my mind drifted into dreams, into plans, into anything except the page in front of me. Still, the days found their rhythm. Classes, hostel meals, sport practices I pretended not to miss. Walking to the dam to skip stones when life felt too tight. And then, before I could blink, the April short holiday arrived. A silence that had no source. When I walked into our house that holiday, I felt something strange in the air. A silence that didn't belong there. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind. The kind that sits in a room long before anyone speaks. For months, my father had been trying something new. He had opened a clothing shop in the northern side of Sasselberg. My mother worked there during the day. I used to think it was wonderful. We own a shop. But even as a boy, something about it bothered me. The shop was far from the town center, not where people shopped. Isolated, quiet, wrong. That holiday Friday, the sun was still high when a massive furniture truck pulled up in front of our house. I heard the engine before I saw the men. My father was at work. I ran inside, breathless, and told my mother they must have the wrong address. But when the man with the clipboard stepped out, gray hat, stern eyes, papers in his hand, something sank inside me. They weren't at the wrong house. I watched from the hallway while he spoke to my mother on the stoop. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw the way her face changed, the way color drained from it, the way her shoulders sagged. Then the men began walking into our house. They moved through the rooms with practiced hands, pasting stickers on our furniture, nodding to each other. My mother stood frozen, tears threatening, but not yet falling. I ran to her, panicked. "What's happening, Ma?" She swallowed hard. "I'll explain later, Christy. The shop didn't work out. The sheriff's men, that's who they were, took everything. Everything except our beds and a few basics we needed to survive. Even my rally bicycle, my pride, was lifted and carried away despite my desperate bargaining. Please, that's mine. Please." He didn't look unkind, only tired. "Sorry, son. I have my orders." That afternoon, we sat in an empty house. My mother cried softly. Humiliation, disappointment, fear all woven together. The silence felt enormous, like the walls had grown too big for the little family still inside them. That evening, my father came home in a borrowed car. The BMW was gone too. He walked inside without a word. He didn't ask questions. He didn't explain. He simply sat down on the stoop with his pipe, staring into nothing. A man made small in a single day, the weight a child cannot carry. For the rest of the holiday, I spent my days at the dam, throwing stones into the water, watching the ripples disappear, wishing life worked the same way. Wishing you could throw something away and watch its effects vanish. But real life didn't dissolve. It stayed. It pressed on your chest. It made the world feel uncertain in a way no 13-year-old, no 16-year-old should ever have to understand. My father withdrew even further. After his parents died, something in him had already hardened, a silence that grew year after year. But losing everything that day, the business, the furniture, the pride, pushed him deeper into himself. He became cold, distant, almost clinical. That silence was harder than the repossession itself. I didn't want to be in that house anymore. Didn't want to watch my mother's quiet crying. Didn't want to hear my father's pipe tapping against the ashtray. Didn't want to feel the shame that filled every room. So I stayed at the dam, my secret place, the only space where I could breathe. The day I started to break, the morning my father took me back to the hostel, he packed my bags into the old Chevrolet Uncle Johann had loaned him, a car with wings on the back like an airplane, built somewhere in the 1950s. As he closed the boot, something inside me cracked. I started crying. Not loud, just quietly, helplessly. Tears I had held in for months. My mother wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "Christy, it will all be okay again." I didn't believe her, not then. In the car, I wiped my eyes quickly and turned to my father. "Pa, please don't drop me in front of the hostel. Just leave me at the school gate." I couldn't bear the thought of boys seeing that car, of hearing the jokes, of facing their smirks. I could already hear the humiliation in my head. He nodded, no emotion, no questions. Just a quiet, "Okay." He left me at the gate. I walked the rest alone. A new seat of escape. Back in the hostel, life went on as if my world hadn't collapsed at home. Prefects shouted. Boys joked about meaningless things. Rugby players practiced. Teachers lectured. But something had shifted inside me. The dam back home had been my escape. Now the military became the new one. My cousin Atty, my childhood hero, served in the police. He would visit during holidays with photographs from the Angola border, standing in camouflage, sunburned, with a trained falcon perched on his arm. Freedom, adventure, danger, purpose, everything I needed. I tried to fix my academics. I tried to catch up with mathematics and science. I tried to be the boy who understood numbers. But the truth was simple. I was too far behind, and I was too tired to pretend. Then one night in the boiler room, where we went to smoke in secret, Conrad, a grade 12 boy, told me he wasn't waiting for the army draft. He was joining the permanent force. He wanted to do his trade through the military. My ears burned with excitement. A way out, a future, a skill, a path I could walk with dignity. He told me everything. You must be 16. You must apply at the police station. They will tell you when to report. That night I didn't sleep. Something in me knew. This was it. This was the road that would take me out of the drowning place I felt trapped in. The hardest phone call. It took me a full week to gather the courage to call my father. I feared him. Not physically, but emotionally. His silence was scarier than his anger. His disappointment was a shadow I carried. I stood in the hostel phone booth, sweating, trying to remember our home number, the stress wiping my memory clean. He answered. I told him my plan. That the military offered trades, that it would save them money, that I wanted to build a future. I did not tell him the truth, that I was failing, that I would not pass grade 11, that repeating the year felt like dying slowly. He listened quietly, then asked only one practical question. Which box must I tick? Navy, Army, or Air Force? Without thinking, I said, Air Force? Why? I didn't know. Maybe the word sounded like freedom. 2 weeks later, he called back. The call that split my life in two. A prefect came into the study hall, scolded me first. No phone calls during study. Then added, Your father says it's urgent. I ran. My father's voice over the crackling line was calm, businesslike. Your application is approved. You must report on the 1st of July at the Air Force Training School before 3 in the afternoon. I will inform the school principal. For a moment, everything inside me went still. Not joy, not fear, not relief. Something bigger. A realization that life had just taken a turn I could never undo. When I left the telephone booth, I didn't go back to study hall. I walked. Out the hostel doors, across the dark school grounds, past the rugby fields, through the gate, all the way to the main road a few kilometers away, alone under the night sky. And strangely, I felt free. For the first time in years, I felt something lift. Not happiness, not yet, but a loosening of the knot that had been choking me since Vanderbilt Park, since the repossession, since that silent house where my father sat with his pipe and my mother cried alone. I still had no idea what the military would do to me, how it would break me, how it would rebuild me, how it would become the rise I had been waiting for. But that night, walking along the long road under the stars, I knew one thing. A chapter of my life had just ended. The boy I had been, the scared one, the ashamed one, the one running from failure, had taken his final steps. And somewhere ahead, the young man I needed to become was waiting.
Reflection. The last footstep before the road turned, on shame, surrender, and the quiet decision that ends a childhood. Some chapters in our lives don't end with a celebration. They don't end with applause or triumph or the satisfying feeling that all the loose pieces have finally come together. Some chapters end in silence, a silence so deep that only years later do you realize it was, in fact, the sound of a door closing behind you. This story, the final one of my hostel years, was such a door. When I look back now, I don't see the old Chevrolet with the wings on the back. I don't see the sheriff's truck or the empty living room. I don't even see the shame that burned in my chest when I asked my father to drop me at the school gate instead of the hostel door. What I see most clearly is the boy sitting alone at the dam, trying to make sense of something far too heavy for his young shoulders. A repossession is not just the taking of furniture. It is the taking of certainty. It is the moment a child realizes that adults are not superhuman, that life is not always fair, and that sometimes the people you depend on are fighting battles you never even knew existed. I didn't know it then, but that day shaped a quiet promise inside me, a vow that I would never allow myself to become powerless again. The shame I felt wasn't just about losing possessions. It was the kind of shame that seeps into your bones when you watch your parents break in front of you, when your mother cries softly into her hands, when your father's silence becomes a wall you cannot climb, when you are left alone with thoughts too big for your age. That kind of shame doesn't disappear. It settles. It changes you. For months after that holiday, I walked with a heaviness I couldn't name. I felt failure at school creeping closer. I felt the embarrassment of the car, the emptiness of the house, my father's silence, and I felt something else too. A small voice inside me quietly whispering that I needed to get out, not to run away, but to survive. When I stood in that hostel phone booth, struggling to remember our home number, My decision was not the brave charge of a young man ready to conquer the world. It was the trembling choice of a boy who could feel the walls closing in. Joining the Air Force wasn't a dream, it was a lifeline. And yet, when I walked alone to the main road that night, hearing the news that my application was approved, something unexpected happened. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not because I was certain, not because I was ready, not because the fear was gone, but because I realized that this was no longer a chapter I belonged in. My time in hostel corridors, study halls, rugby fields, and quiet dormitory nights had reached its end. The boy who had survived Vanderbilt Park, who had learned cleverness over fists, who had tasted his first kiss in the shadows behind the workshops, that boy had now walked as far as he could. There are moments in life when you feel the ground shift beneath your feet, when you realize that you cannot stay where you are, not because it is unsafe, but because it no longer fits the person you are becoming. This was such a moment. The military would not just be the next chapter, it would be the beginning of a new identity, one shaped not by shame, but by strength, not by silence, but by discipline, not by confusion, but by purpose. But before that rise could begin, the boy had to end. That night, standing next to the long road outside the school, under a sky bigger than my problems, I didn't know what waited for me in July. I didn't know about the pain, the training, the loneliness, the friendships, the pride, or the breaking and rebuilding that military life would demand. All I knew was this. Some stories end quietly. Some endings feel like failure. But sometimes the quietest ending is the one that saves your life. My hostel years did not end with victory. They ended with a phone call and a long walk under the stars. But it was enough, because in that silence, in that loneliness, in that long road leading away from everything I knew, the young man I was meant to become took his first step. Epilogue, Chapter 2. When survival became a language. If I close my eyes and walk back through my secondary school years, I don't see one neat story. I see fragments, a bicycle and a dream, a green blazer, a dark cinema, a hostel passage, a bully's hand, a girl's kiss, a rugby try, a furniture truck, a boy walking alone to a main road under the stars. On paper, these moments look separate, but in my soul, they were all part of one long lesson. How does a young person's inner world survive when the outer world feels out of control? At Sasselberg, I discovered that adults can change the course of your life without asking for your opinion. At Vanderbilt Park, I discovered how easy it is to fall out of yourself when you no longer recognize the life you're living. At DeWitt Knell, I discovered that even in chaos, you can learn to adapt, to read people, to stand your ground. On the rugby field, I discovered that lost parts of yourself can be found again. In the dark hall with a horror movie about frogs, I discovered that tenderness can arrive for you even if you feel invisible. In the shower after Michael slaps, I discovered the quiet power of a thinking mind. In the empty house with stickers on the furniture, I discovered that adults break too. And in the phone booth, I discovered that some roads must be chosen not because you're ready, but because you know you cannot stay where you are. This chapter did not give me peace. It gave me patterns, patterns of thought. I must watch carefully. I must protect myself. I must find a way out. I still have something inside me. Patterns of feeling, shame that tried to define me, loneliness that hollowed me out, flashes of belonging that kept me going, and moments of courage that appeared just when I wanted to give up. If Chapter 1 was the story of how my soul absorbed the world around me, then Chapter 2 is the story of how my soul began gently, stubbornly to talk back. These teenage years did not produce the final version of my mindset. They produced the survival version, the one that knew how to read danger, how to withdraw without collapsing, how to strike back with strategy, how to hold onto small sparks of hope in the middle of failure. Later in life, in the military, in business, in leadership, I would have to unlearn some of these survival habits and replace them with healthier patterns. But I cannot deny their role. They kept me standing when the world felt like it was falling apart. So if the childhood chapter of my life wrote the first stories on the soul of my being, then the secondary school years carved deeper lines, harder, sharper, sometimes painful, but honest. This was not the chapter where I became a man. This was the chapter where the boy learned how to endure long enough to reach the place where manhood could begin. The footprints I left in these years were not pretty. They were messy, restless, sometimes angry, sometimes tender. But they were real, and every one of them led me forward toward a uniform that was not a school blazer, toward parade grounds and barracks, toward a new kind of discipline and a new kind of belonging, toward the next chapter, the chapter where the broken, surviving boy would walk into the military and begin slowly to rise. When survival starts talking, what my secondary school years taught me about identity, power, and the stories we tell ourselves. By the time a child reaches secondary school, something important has already happened inside, the basic wiring of belief that has been laid down. But between the ages of roughly 13 and 18, that wiring is tested, stretched, sometimes burned, and often rewired under pressure. This is not just teenage drama. It is a critical stage of mindset development. In my life, this stage came with three big themes. 1, control and power. Who decides over my life? 2, belonging and identity. Where, if anywhere, do I fit? 3, survival and strategy. What must I do to stay emotionally alive? Let's look at how these played out, not as stories now, but as a map of mindset. 1, control and power. Who is steering my life? At 13, sitting at that dinner table, I discovered how small a child's voice can feel in the face of adult decisions. My path was chosen: Vanderbilt Park, not Sasselberg; green, not blue. A school I did not want for reasons I did not understand. The mindset that formed here was, big decisions happen to me, not with me. My dreams are negotiable, other people's conflicts are not. This can easily become a victim mindset, but in me, something else started to grow alongside the pain. A quiet resolve: one day I will choose my own road. Years later, standing in that phone booth asking to join the Air Force, that seed finally surfaced. The mindset of no control produced the determination to find control in a different way. Many adults still live from that early belief. I don't get to choose. Their work, relationships, and lifestyle are extensions of teenage powerlessness. Change begins the moment they remember, I am allowed to choose a different road now. 2, belonging and identity. Who am I when I don't fit anywhere? Vanderbilt Park taught me how it feels to fall out of yourself. When a child loses his place in sport, in friendship circles, in family confidence, he doesn't just lose activities, he loses mirrors. Those spaces where he once saw himself as capable, liked, needed. My inner conclusions were, if I don't perform, I disappear. If I don't fit, I withdraw. It's safer not to try than to fail again. That is why I stopped running, why I stopped high jump, even after promising to jump for a friend in heaven, why I let rugby go, why I walked into the cinema instead of the classroom. But even in that withdrawal, a different thread remained. I still longed to belong. I still wanted one space where my presence mattered. At DeWitt Knell, this longing slowly found new forms. Being the boy who could read the room. Being Pata, who could laugh at himself. Being the player who could score a winning try. Being the boy a girl chose to hold on to in the dark. Our teenage years often write the first lines of our identity script. I am the funny one, the quiet one, the clever one, the strong one, the outsider. These roles are not the truth of who we are. They are survival positions. Healing begins when we start asking, who was I before I started playing a role? And who do I want to be now? 3, survival and strategy. How do I stay emotionally alive? When a young person cannot change his environment, he begins to adapt internally. In my case, that adaptation became observation, watching before acting, withdrawal, disappearing to reduce pain, escaping, movies, daydreams, tunnels, strategizing, planning around danger rather than confronting it head-on. The Michael story is the clearest example. I didn't fight back with fists. I watched, waited, learned his patterns. Then I changed the situation without exposing myself. This produced a powerful mindset. I am not helpless. I can think my way through danger. That same mindset later became a strength in military life and business, reading people, spotting risks, thinking 3 moves ahead. But every strength has a shadow. The shadow side of this mindset is overthinking, struggling to trust, always scanning for danger, finding it hard to rest inside safe relationships. The very strategies that once protected us can later limit us. The goal is not to erase them, but to update them, from pure survival to wise discernment to open, grounded living. 4. Awakening and tenderness. What does love say about my worth? In the middle of shame, loneliness, and silent battles, there were also moments of tenderness. A mother saying, "I'm sorry, we made a mistake." A girl reaching for my arm in a dark hall and kissing me in gratitude. A teacher giving me a second chance on the rugby field. A father's quiet, "Well done, my boy," down a crackling phone line. These moments whispered a different story to my mindset. You are not completely invisible. You are still worth effort, risk, and affection. Even when you've lost yourself, other people can still see something in you. These whispers did not erase the pain, but they stopped the pain from becoming my entire identity. 5. The completed mindset of Chapter 2. If I had to summarize the mindset that walked out of my secondary school years and into the military, it would sound like this. About myself. I am not finished, even when I feel broken. There is still something inside me worth fighting for. About others, people can hurt me, so I must watch them carefully. But people can also see me, save me, and open doors at the right moment. About life. Life is often unfair, but I am not powerless. If I cannot change my circumstances, I can change my decisions. About love and worth. I might not understand love, but I am not unlovable. Small moments of tenderness can keep a soul alive for years. About the future. Staying where I am will break me. Even a scary road is better than a dead one. This is the mindset that stepped across the line between schoolboy and soldier. It was not yet healed. It was not yet whole. But it was ready. Ready to be challenged. Ready to be disciplined. Ready to be forged by something bigger than itself. And that is where we go next. To Chapter 3, the military, where survival becomes strength, and the boy finally begins to rise.